Welcome to Aspen Leading Edge. I'm Patty Roberts from St. Mary's University School of Law, and today we have the distinct pleasure of having as a guest Mark Alexander. He is the Arthur J. Kania Dean at Villanova University Charles Widger School of Law and is in his 10th year in that position. So welcome, Dean Alexander.
Thanks for having me, Patty. It's great to talk to you.
Well, I am especially pleased to talk to you because were it not for you and a couple of others, I would not be a dean. You were very encouraging. You were supportive when I submitted applications. You helped guide me through the process. So thank you for that. Thank you for caring about the leadership that joins you and comes after you.
I am honored, certainly, to be part of your path. You've been a great leader in legal education. And when I first met you and got to know of your interests in leadership, it was my pleasure to be able to talk to you along the way and now to have you as a colleague. So that's one of the great joys of this job as dean is to be able to help folks along who have an interest in leadership because it's tough work. It's challenging work. I think it's really important. And I also find it interesting and fun. And so for those who want to be involved in it, I'd like to be supportive.
Well, you have been very supportive. And then after I was dean at another Catholic law school, because of course Villanova, very Catholic law school, you sent me a bust of St. Thomas More, which sat on my mantle for 2 years until I passed it on to Dean Tony Verona. But if you want to share a little bit about that statue, what a wonderful presence it was in my office, especially because of how it came to be and how it came from you.
Oh, yeah. Well, so that is something which was presented to me after I had become dean. And it is a nice way in which various deans have shared their support for each other in recognizing the importance of education at Catholic schools among Catholic deans. There's a way in which I think it's important for us to think about values. And for me, I always think that a legal education without values at the core is meaningless. And the St. Thomas More, the bust of St. Thomas More has been passed over many years now from one dean to another as we see fit. There's no official nomination or anything like that, but it's a way in which we express our gratitude for others who serve. And what I think is important is that in the Catholic schools, and I think for religiously affiliated schools broadly, but I'm very proud to be at a Catholic school and at Villanova. And prior to that, I was at Seton Hall on the faculty, and I was also the academic dean there. We get to talk about mission in a way that many folks do not. And I think it's just so important because the law can be seen as sterile and as just how to keep the rules. But in fact, the law is about our moral code in a big picture sense. Things like we all believe that one should not kill somebody else. Now, that may be because you read something in the Bible, or maybe, frankly, maybe it's something in the Quran, or maybe it's just what your mom and dad taught you. But the law reflects values, judgments, and I think for us at Catholic schools to really push and lean into that and to say, like, we are founded on certain principles. We at Villanova, for example, we are a Catholic Augustinian institution. Our motto, university motto, Veritas Unitas Caritas, speaks of truth, unity, and love. That to me is just so very important for us to embrace those values and to speak about values and to find ways to make sure everyone thinks about their values as they pursue legal education.
Well, those are tremendous core values, and it's no wonder Villanova has been so successful, the law school under your watch. Tell me, 10 years is a long time to be a dean, a
Yeah.
law school dean these days. Please describe kind of how the position has changed over time for you and at Villanova. You also have some great insight into how it's changed nationally because of your presidency of the Association for American Law Schools and also the program that Villanova and Seattle do each year to increase diversity in leadership in law school deanships.
Right. So, yeah, this is my 10th year as dean, which I still find remarkable. And I would say probably for you too, when you get the job, you think, oh, wow, how fortunate am I? This is going to be a great opportunity. And I had a contract and I thought, oh, of course, I'll serve out my contract. But I didn't start saying like, I'm going to do this for 10 years. I wanted just to do a really good job. And so it's been such a joyous journey that I'm glad that I've been able to be the dean for almost 10 years now. And indeed, so much has changed. You ask about change. A lot has changed. And I think for me, I guess I'll start with Villanova Law for a second. When I came in, there was a lot of work that we had to do. We'd had some challenging times prior to my deanship. And a lot of my first couple of years were spent in two basic modes. One was just getting to know the place. When you come, as you did, come from outside institution, you need to learn. You need to learn who the people are, what the ups and downs are. You need to learn the practical things. Like, we all know what a registrar does, for example, but we don't know who the registrar is and what their strengths are in that position and how to support them. So you get to know that. That was one thing, is getting to know the institution. And the other thing was, for us, again, we had faced some challenges, and we're really still coming out of a lot of challenging times from not my predecessor, but before that, a number of things that had put us on our heels. So that was the first couple of years. And I feel like we really got ourselves into a very good position in the first couple of years. And then round started in 2016. So first 2 years, things are now going well. I feel like we're really hitting a good stride. And then academic year 2019 starts. I feel like things are wonderful. And then, of course, spring of 2020,
Oh, yes.
in comes COVID. And for everybody, that changed everything. There's no one who, of course, was unaffected by it. And we were all affected in different ways. For me, as a leader, it was an extraordinary challenge how to lead in the most difficult of times. And I firmly believe that, as much as I certainly didn't want a global pandemic, that was what I was hired to deal with. Whatever came up, I had to deal with. And at every school, you have different challenges that come up in different times. And this was one that, again, affected all of us in different ways. But that was a good test of leadership. And that was an opportunity where I worked closely with my president and provost to figure out how we could do our best to stay open for in-person education and do so while protecting the health and safety of our students. And of course, faculty, staff who work there, we had the rules, but I was just thinking about, what's the education for the students? And that meant we had to think about different contingencies. How do you deal with testing and who gets access, things like that? So that's, say, it was a big challenge, which in the better part of 2 years really consumed us across the country. And you have to work with state rules, local rules, national rules, and regulations. And being part of a larger university was a big help in that regard, to think about how we collectively were trying to make sure, again, that everybody, faculty, students, and staff, were safe, but also to go forward as much as possible with in-person education. So then that was a next phase, I guess I would say. And then for me, the next phase that really came along is that, as you mentioned before, I was active in the leadership of the Association of American Law Schools, which is an organization which is both a professional organization for all law schools, all faculty, all staff. It's a learned society. It's a lot of different things all rolled into one. It's not our actual accreditor, but it serves in many ways akin to an accreditor in terms of reviewing schools and supporting schools. So it serves so many different functions. And I had served a 3-year term on the executive committee, and then I had the good fortune of serving as the president, and that was a 3-year term, president-elect in 22, president in 23, and past president in 24. So that, to me, was another phase of my own journey as dean, during which I tried to bring the lessons of Villanova Law to the broader community, but also to bring the broader community lessons back home as I was out and about on behalf of the law school. And meanwhile, you see, constantly there are changes in legal education, which frankly brings us sort of to this day. So for me personally, the journey has been in several phases. And I think for us now, gosh, legal education is facing so many interesting challenges, which I'm sure we'll talk about that too. But I think that the decade has been really quite something. And then the last thing I would say, yes, part of what we've been doing is we've had a workshop, which for 15 years has been in existence prior to my deanship, where we look at how to, frankly, build a pipeline for folks to get into legal education leadership. And it's a wonderful workshop where we have typically 20 to 25 folks who are aspiring to leadership roles, and we have an equivalent number of current deans. And we run through a program where we talk about what it takes to become the dean, what the job is like, the steps you might want to take as a dean, how you deal with questions like fundraising, external and internal politics, so many different parts of it. But what's great about it is we have the formal programming, but so much of it is just the informal mentoring and networking. And that is indeed how you and I met, and how I've met a lot of my current dean colleagues. And it's a chance where we just get to say to folks in a more intimate setting how we do the job and to build the support that is essential for being successful in it.
Well, it indeed was what turned the tide for me to apply and be successful. And as a result of that, now several years later, I'm in my 6th year, the executive committee and I of the dean section of AALS have just transitioned that section to one for aspiring law school leaders. And I think in an attempt to build on what you all are doing with the workshop each year and the informal mentoring, we need more leaders, right? A quarter of the
Yeah.
deans turn over every year. These jobs are the most amazing jobs in the world, but also quite demanding. And so I think building those pipelines is so important, as well as for vice deans and associate deans. So I hope that it will gain some traction and we'll get some more people interested in these really dynamic roles. Boy,
Yeah, I think, and I also just would want to mention really quickly that this was something that was started at Seattle University, and Kelly Testy, who is now the president of ALS, was the one who launched this back then, and during her leadership as dean at Seattle U, and then actually at University of Washington. And it used to be every other year, and then when I became dean at Villanova, I said, "Can we do it every year?" And we rotated East Coast, West Coast, and that has been able to expand, I think, our reach and our impact. But I'm really grateful for my partners at Seattle University currently, Dean Tony Verona, Annette Clark, who was a dean before. It's been some wonderful folks who have been leading this. And like all things, we do not stand alone. We stand on the shoulders of those who come before us.
absolutely. Kelly Testy, another one of my champions from that workshop. So really impactful work that you're doing with the team members that you mentioned. So you're at Villanova Law. You've had all these different chapters. Really, I love how you went through. I mean, you really can chunk it, right? These different experiences. You had an amazing year of success as the president of AALS, and it was rather prophetic of you that year's presidency theme was defending democracy.
Yeah,
Who
yeah.
knew we would need to rely on that year of programming so significantly? But you now have a new phase at Villanova Law, and a very significant one that will ensure the legacy of your leadership and the leadership of others. Can you tell us a little bit about your campaign that you're undertaking?
Yeah, thank you. As a university, we are in the middle of a capital campaign called Espiritus Nova. And the public phase launched in October of 24. And I've just spent the past year with the university leadership traveling around the country, spreading the word to Villanovans about this capital campaign. And our goal as a university is to raise $1.25 billion. Specifically for the law school, we're trying to raise $100 million. And this is the public phase, and at this point, we are in the law school over $70 million towards that $100 million goal. The
Wow.
university, yeah, it's fantastic. The university has been meeting all of its goals very, very much on pace to meet that $1.25 billion goal. And I think you've used the term before, like securing legacy. I think it's important when we talk about raising money, it's not about raising money for the sake of having money. It's raising money to support what we do in the school and to support the students on their path to becoming excellent lawyers. And that's to me always important that we think about it not in terms of the dollars. And of course, we set goals and we want to meet those goals, and the dollars are important, but they serve a greater purpose. And so when I try to get out there and raise money to support our goals, I talk to people about the impact that their giving has. And I talk about the students who they can support through scholarships or the new professorships we can create through endowments. Talk about the programming we can endow and to make sure that for going forward we can have great folks who come in as speakers, and how that changes lives and that changes the nature of our academic institution. And to me, those conversations are so exciting, and I get to talk to people about their own passions in life and to see how those meet our priorities that we have. And so when you go out and you ask for money, if you say, "I want money," you might be successful, but probably it's not a long-term relationship. But if you start talking about the priorities you have, start talking about the student successes, the faculty who are doing great work in research and writing, that's when folks really, really get excited and realize that their philanthropic support is going to go to a really, not just a worthy cause, because they love Villanova in our context, but to making a difference that will last. And that's why I thought your use of the word legacy was so important.
Well, I am not surprised at how successful you've been so far in the campaign because your enthusiasm is infectious. I mean,
Huh.
it's certainly very evident. And that's one thing that I think scares a lot of prospective deans. They're like, oh, I don't know about the fundraising. But if you're talking about that impact and the way that people can change the lives of not only students, but the generations of their families and the trajectory, that is really exciting. We're just
Very
stewards for a short time, but you can make sure that gifts pay it forward long into the future. So good luck
well
with that.
put. Thank you. Very well put there, Patty.
One of the things I wanted to ask about, you had your Defending Democracy year at AALS, and one of the things that has happened since then is you've started a public forum for leaders with differing views, the Building
Yeah.
Bridges initiative at Villanova Law. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, thanks for asking about that. I really love that. It's sort of a signature initiative of mine where I look at the world and I think about the sort of the coarseness in our society and the ways in which we are finding such difficulty in getting along. And I know that we as a society can do better. And I know that in law school, we are training leaders for the future, and we're also training people who are specifically advocates. Our students become lawyers who advocate for their position, their client, their cause. And I think it's very important for us to show how we can advocate, how we can dialogue, sometimes agree, sometimes disagree, but do it in a certain kind of way that I think has been lost, and how we can engage in civil discourse across divides. So I launched the Building Bridge Initiative 2023 to model that kind of behavior. So for our first one was we had two former United States senators, Kelly Ayotte, Republican from New Hampshire, and Russ Feingold, Democrat from Wisconsin. And actually, subsequent to that, she has been elected to the governorship of New Hampshire.
Oh, my goodness. Okay.
But she was a former senator at the time. But the two of them sat on the stage with me, and we just talked about how, in their time in the United States Senate, they managed to reach across the aisle. And sometimes, as I said, sometimes agree and sometimes disagree. Our second installment was actually a road show, so to speak. We went to Washington, D.C. We had the former chief of staff for President Bill Clinton, and the former chief of staff for President George W. Bush. And again, just the two of them on a stage with me talking, and people were just amazed to see how these two folks who are at the right hand of the most powerful person on earth, right? And one a Republican, one a Democrat, but they were like old friends who were talking about their time at camp together. It was amazing. And so we could see that sometimes you have to push through ideological differences, but there's a way you can still find ways to agree. Sometimes you have to take a vote, and one person wins and one person loses, but the next week you take a vote and it switches. And that was really inspirational. That was the second one. The third one we did actually was back here. We had two Supreme Court litigators who argued a case and then had a discussion about that. And again, they modeled for the students how these things work. And each of those, that was legislative, executive, judicial branch. We showed this different way. And actually, the most recent thing we did, we've done several other programs, but the most recent one we did very recently, we had a political science professor. Her name is Hari Han, and she wrote a book called Undivided. Fascinating book. It's a study of an evangelical megachurch in Cincinnati and work that they did specifically around questions of race in their community. And Professor Hahn sort of stumbled on this community and ended up studying four individuals, one black man, one white man, one black woman, one white woman, and looked at their experiences. And it's an unvarnished view of what happened, the good, the bad, and the ugly, trying to find ways in which we have to sometimes challenge ourselves to reach across divides and expose ourselves and understand that sometimes maybe it's not that they're wrong, but maybe I'm not right about this, or maybe they're not wrong, but they just have a different perspective. So that's all to say that all of this is trying to find a way for all of us to engage better with each other. And I feel like our society needs it. And that also goes back to the first thing we we're talking about, being at a Catholic school where we talk about truth, unity, and love. I think it's so important that we need to extend ourselves as love with our brothers and sisters, treat each other like that. It creates a very different world when you look at people as your brothers and sisters. And that means sometimes you're going to get along and sometimes not, which I'm sure everyone listening to this knows. It's not about each other's getting along, but you understand that basic humanity and decency in people. And it makes it a lot harder just to write people off and to yell at them. And so I'm hoping we can make progress because I think that's a huge, huge challenge in society for us going forward.
Yeah, I think modeling that is so important for our students, but also showing you can disagree, you will disagree, but you can do it with kindness and respect. So that's an exciting program you've started. One of the ways that, I mean, Villanova is a university recognized globally, but it might have risen in its recognition more recently because of a very incredible world appointment. So can you tell us a
Yeah.
little bit about your most famous alumnus at this moment?
Yeah, the most famous alumnus, class of 73, I believe it is, Pope Leo XIV. It's hard to believe. It's such an extraordinary moment for the world when there is a new pope elected, but for it to be that the pope is an alum and that he's an Augustinian. And as I mentioned before, Villanova is an Augustinian Catholic institution. And so the order is very proud, of course, of their brother. And it's remarkable to be with so many folks here on campus, so many of the priests on campus who this is their brother. And many of them have told stories of how their friend, their brother Bob, did X, Y, and Z. And they find it remarkable that this man who they describe as a humble, warm, loving man, devoted to God and obviously serving his life in the church. But they speak of him in such warm and glowing terms that it's really been an extraordinary moment for us that we're embracing. This is not something where we go out to the world and say we're all about the Pope, but we hope that people understand that when he was here, he learned in the great tradition that we have that is not different from 50 years ago when he graduated to today, that we are grounded in truth, unity, and love. We are grounded by the rule of St. Augustine. We are grounded by, reading various parts of St. Augustine's writings where he talks, for example, we like to often speak about how St. Augustine talked about becoming what you are not yet, that constant journey that we are on, saying that our hearts are restless until they rest in you. That's the kind of thing where it's about something much bigger. And knowing that the Pope came through this campus and that he was imbued with his spirit here, and that he's carried that throughout his career in the United States and around the world. And now as the leader of the Catholic Church and 1.4 billion Catholics, it's extraordinary. And it is a world leader position that extends, certainly starts with being the Pope and the leader of the Catholic Church, but it extends to being one of the great leaders in the world. And I will say that we are in a position where I am just so pleased to see how well his papacy is going so far. And every day it has a particular resonance for me and my family, and certainly for everyone here in the law school. And it's very inspirational.
It's so lovely how you describe what his brothers feel about him and their reflections. And boy, you couldn't have a more approachable, loving Pope, at least from early signs of it. So I'm delighted that he's an Augustinian trained at Villanova. Can you share with our listeners how the Villanova leadership learned of this rise to this position for Pope Leo?
That was extraordinary. We, as I mentioned before, we're in this capital campaign. We've been all over the country. It happened to be that we were in Chicago in May, and we'd picked these dates far in advance. So the president of the university and other leaders of the university, we were in Chicago that day, getting ready for an event that night, and the cardinals had gathered in the conclave. And being in Chicago, and all of a sudden hearing that the new pope is from Chicago and a Villanovan and an Augustinian, it was just like this explosion. Father Peter Donahue, our president, was in a restaurant and he said he saw it on TV when the Pope came out and he was stunned. He's like, "Oh my God, it's Bob." That was his immediate reaction. And you think,
Wow.
how is this possible? And it was so amazing. And what was really remarkable is we've been at about 13 different stops on our capital campaign tour. And each stop, each event was really exciting. This one had an energy that was unmatched in that people were just bouncing and they were floating. No one's feet were touching the ground because we just felt this extraordinary energy and frankly pride. That was a remarkable time to hear about it. I remember that I was just watching. I had called my wife because we'd heard about the white smoke, and we were just on the phone with each other as a Catholic family. We were just besides ourselves with joy to know that there was a new pope, but that he was an American, an Augustinian, and a Villanovan. So it was a really great moment.
Thank you for sharing that. I love that story. Before we conclude, Mark, you're in such an outstanding position and to answer this final question, because you've seen the last decade of the evolution of legal education. Where do you think we are going as an academy in the coming decade?
That is a great question, Patty. Where are we going, boy, in a decade ahead? I would say there's a few things that we need to look at with legal education. First, I would just refer back to the conversation we had about civility, building bridges, et cetera. I think that our society is more divided now than in almost any time, and legal education is going to have to rise to the challenge to train leaders who will help build bridges. That's one thing that I see ahead. A second thing, which I think is happening right now, is that we see the old norms and assumptions about the value of academic institutions is under significant strain. And so we see massive debates about universities. And I think that legal education has to stand up for us understanding that academic freedom is essential to our growth as a society, that the pursuit of ideas is a very important thing and it helps us grow. And right now we're trying to figure out what those parameters are. A third thing I would say is the rule of law and the sort of the nature of our democracy is under challenge. Whether or not you are a supporter of the current president, everybody knows this president has a much larger view of the power of the presidency than ever before. We go in phases, and you can look throughout. I'm a con law professor. You can go back to Marbury v. Madison, in which the court talked about its power versus the president's power. That was a power grab by the court, frankly. So we go through these phases where we see who's got more power. And right now, we are in a place where we have to think about how much there's give and take and how much the rule of law is challenged and how much our democratic institutions are stressed, but how much they hold too. So I think that's a third thing to think about. Fourth thing, which I think is key for the next decade, is how we deal with AI. And we always have changes. Back when I was a student, we were talking about Westlaw and Lexis changing everything. They've been talking about computers changing this. And I'm sure that somebody once said typewriters are going to change everything. And there's always change, but AI definitely is a very big change. And what I think is important in that context, and what we're doing here at Villanova, we have a task force, and we're looking at it from sort of a holistic perspective. One angle is we've got professors on the task force who work in the field of tech and AI. So we got a theoretical perspective. Second is we've got librarians on the task force. In fact, I hired somebody recently who is specifically hired to work with tech and AI. Somebody actually recent Villanova Law graduate, because frankly, the younger folks really know more than folks of my generation. And then we also have on that task force, we have folks from our Office of Career Strategy, jobs, because we prepare students for jobs as lawyers. And that's all to say that I think, and there are other perspectives you can bring to bear to this conversation, but it's not a one size fits all. And you have to understand, like, there's some theory, there's job training, there's how do we gather information. So I think AI is going to be a big challenge ahead, and we're going to have to rise to make sure that we embrace the challenge and don't run from it.
Well, thank you. That's an excellent synopsis of where you think we're going. And it certainly is going to keep us both busy, right?
Yeah, very busy for sure.
Well, thank you so much for the conversation. I really enjoyed catching up. Dean Mark Alexander from Villanova University, Charles Widger School of Law, and best of luck with your campaign and the rest of the academic year.
Thank you very much, Patty. It's been a real pleasure.